Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest form of written record that we have. They've been translated, and they tell exciting stories about how gods intermingled with human beings and actually had a hand in the creation of human beings.
On December 30th, 1983, the Washington Post ran a headline that NASA has spent more than 40 years pretending it never printed. A heavenly body, possibly as large as Jupiter, detected at the cold edge of our solar system. The chief scientist on the project went on the record. Then the story vanished. The strangest part is not what NASA found that winter.
It's a form of time travel. It catapults you back in time thousands of years and puts you directly into the shoes of somebody who lived so many years before us.
It is that a clay tablet pulled from the ruins of Nineveh in 1849 appears to have already mapped it. The tablet they buried in the basement. The tablet was discovered by a British archaeologist named Austen Henry Layard, dug out of the ruins of the ancient Assyrian library at Nineveh. It was covered in cuneiform script and strange circular diagrams that looked like nothing he had ever seen before. The tablet was catalogued as K8538 and shipped to the British Museum, where it was filed under astronomical reference texts and quietly forgotten. For more than a century, the tablet sat in storage. Curators glanced at it. Scholars labeled it. No one could fully explain what it was. The cuneiform annotations carved into its surface used terms that did not match standard Mesopotamian star catalogs.
Being able to print something and put it in people's hands lets them actually connect to objects that are thousands of years old.
The circular diagrams divided into segments did not align with any known constellation map. Then, in 1976, a researcher named Zechariah Sitchin examined the tablet and made a claim that would ignite decades of controversy. He said this was not just an ancient star chart. It was a record of our entire solar system, including a 10th planet that mainstream science had never confirmed. A planet the Sumerians called Nibiru. That claim has never gone away. And neither has the tablet, the planisphere and its impossible geometry. The artifact is now known as the Sumerian planisphere. It is a circular clay disc, roughly the size of a dinner plate, divided into 8 equal segments like slices of a pie. Each segment contains lines, dots, and cuneiform notes describing celestial objects. According to Sitchin's interpretation, one of these segments depicts our sun surrounded by 11 planetary bodies. Not the 8 we are taught exist today, not the 9 that included Pluto. 11. Sitchin claimed the Sumerians somehow possessed knowledge of Uranus and Neptune thousands of years before modern telescopes discovered them in the 1700s and 1800s. He went further. He said the chart shows a 12th body in our solar system.
Writing on clay, again, in a different way to preserve our information now.
A massive planet on a 3,600-year elliptical orbit that periodically passes through the inner solar system before vanishing back into the outer dark. Mainstream archaeologists rejected the interpretation immediately. They said Sitchin mistranslated the cuneiform. They said he lacked formal credentials in ancient Semitic languages. They said the diagram was nothing more than a depiction of stars and constellations, visible to the naked eye from Mesopotamia around 650 BCE. The British Museum has stated multiple times that the tablet shows the night sky, not the solar system. Scholars argue that ancient people had no concept of planets as worlds orbiting the sun. They saw wandering lights in the heavens and gave them names, nothing more. But there is a problem with that dismissal. The Sumerians were not primitive sky watchers. Their astronomical records were shockingly precise. They tracked the cycles of Venus with accuracy that rivals modern measurements. They calculated lunar eclipses centuries in advance. They divided the sky into 12 sections, the origin of our zodiac, and recorded planetary movements with a mathematical sophistication that should not have been possible for a Bronze Age civilization. They knew the Earth was round. They understood the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year wobble in Earth's axis that modern science did not confirm until the 20th century. These were not people guessing at dots in the sky. So, when mainstream archaeology insists the Sumerians could not possibly have known about outer planets, a simple question presents itself. If they were wrong about that, what else are they wrong about? There is one more detail about the planisphere that the British Museum's official description tends to gloss over. The geometry of the diagram itself does not behave like religious symbolism. The The lines and angles in one segment have been measured by independent researchers and found to correspond to actual planetary trajectories. Lines drawn from a central point at angles that match the orbital paths of known planets. If those lines are coincidence, they are. An unusually precise coincidence for a Bronze Age artifact. If you are interested in this kind of forbidden history, the kind mainstream archaeology refuses to touch, hit subscribe now. New investigations drop every week, and the next one is going somewhere even darker. The 1983 infrared discovery NASA tried to bury. In 1983, NASA launched the infrared astronomical satellite, known as IRAS. It was designed to scan the sky in infrared wavelengths invisible to optical telescopes, looking for cold objects that visible light telescopes had always missed. Within months, IRAS detected something that should not have been there, a massive object in the outer solar system. Cold, distant, and far larger than anything in the known catalog, the signal was strong enough that the IRAS team did not bury it in a footnote. They walked it across the hall to the Washington Post. The Washington Post broke the story on December 30th, 1983, with a headline announcing the discovery of a heavenly body possibly as large as Jupiter. The article quoted Dr. Jerry Neugebauer, chief ERAS scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. According to the published reporting, Neugebauer described an object so large and so close that it could be part of our solar system. The article suggested it was possibly a planet bigger than Jupiter, closer than the nearest star, and completely unknown to modern astronomy. For a few days, the story was everywhere. Then it disappeared. The scientific community walked it back fast. Within weeks, follow-up observations suggested the object might be a distant galaxy. Then it was called an ultra-cold brown dwarf, far outside our solar system. Then it was framed as a misinterpretation of preliminary data. NASA released statements clarifying that the object was not a 10th planet. Official publications dismissed the initial excitement and moved on. The reporters who had covered the original announcement were not invited to cover the retraction. The retraction simply happened, in pieces, in technical journals until the original headline was a footnote nobody cited. The timing is hard to ignore. Just 7 years after Sitchin published The 12th Planet in 1976, NASA's most advanced infrared telescope detected an unexplained massive object in the exact region of space where a hidden outer planet would exist, if it existed at all. The original headlines never reappeared. The original Neugebauer quotes faded from public memory. The story was filed away and forgotten by everyone except the people who had been paying attention to Sitchin's work. The retraction said it was a galaxy. Then it said it was a brown dwarf. Then it said the data was misinterpreted. 3 different explanations for the same anomaly, and not one of them was followed by a dedicated mission to find out which was true. A real scientific anomaly produces a follow-up. A new instrument, a targeted observation, a paper. The IRAS detection produced none of those. It produced retractions in succession, each one quieter than the last, until the question itself was no longer permitted in respectable astronomy. The IRAS data itself remains in the public archive. Independent researchers have requested access to the original infrared signatures and been told that the analysis is settled. It is not a missing file. It is a closed conversation. And every year that passes, the question of what IRAS actually saw in 1983 becomes harder to ask without being labeled a conspiracy theorist. Even though the original Washington Post headline was published by mainstream journalists quoting NASA's own chief scientist on the project, the man who was running the telescope said the object might be the size of Jupiter. Then he was no longer asked. That is not how science usually corrects itself. That is how science gets walked away from. Planet 9 and the quiet admission. In 2016, Caltech astronomers Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown published research suggesting the existence of a massive planet in the outer solar system. They called it Planet 9, not because they had seen it directly, but because the orbital patterns of distant Kuiper Belt objects could not be explained by known gravitational forces. These icy bodies beyond Neptune were clustering in ways that suggested a massive unseen world was shepherding them into specific orbits. Batygin and Brown's calculations predicted a planet 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth, orbiting at a distance of 400 to 800 astronomical units from the Sun, with an orbital period of 10,000 to 20,000 years. That orbital period is worth pausing on. Sitchin had claimed in 1976 that Nibiru circled the Sun on a 3,600-year orbit. The Caltech math gave a longer figure, but the underlying picture was identical. A massive body, far out, on a long elliptical loop that brings it nowhere near Earth for thousands of years at a stretch. The name Planet 9 stuck. Mainstream astronomy welcomed the research. It was published in peer-reviewed journals. It was based on gravitational modeling and statistical analysis. It did not mention ancient Sumerians or Zecharia Sitchin, and yet the core claim was the same. There is a massive undiscovered planet in the outer solar system that we cannot see but whose gravitational influence is undeniable. This is the part that should make anyone pause. When Sitchin said it, citing ancient Sumerian tablets, he was branded a pseudoscientist. His translations were called fraudulent. His interpretations were called fantasy. When Caltech scientists said it, citing gravitational models, they were celebrated. The story was front-page news. The math was peer-reviewed. The planet they are describing is functionally identical, massive, outer solar system, long elliptical orbit, gravitational influence on smaller bodies, hidden from direct observation. The only difference is the language used to describe it. One came from clay tablets, the other came from supercomputer simulations. The object itself is the same object. The Caltech team has admitted that finding Planet 9 directly could take years or even decades because of how faint and distant it is. In 2020, astronomers at the University of Michigan proposed that Planet 9 might not even be a planet at all. It could be a primordial black hole, a tiny black hole roughly the size of a grapefruit with the mass of 5 Earths. Such an object would be nearly impossible to detect with current technology, but would explain the gravitational anomalies in the outer solar system. If that is what is out there, the Sumerians did not just record a hidden planet. They recorded something much stranger, and something far more dangerous to acknowledge in public. The cylinder seal that should not exist. There is another artifact that adds weight to all of this. In the 1800s, archaeologists discovered a series of small stone cylinders carved with intricate designs across Mesopotamia. They were used to roll impressions into wet clay, like signature stamps for ancient bureaucrats and priests. One of these seals, catalogued as VOA 243 and housed in the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin, shows a star at the center of a composition. Surrounding that star are 11 smaller spheres of varying sizes, arranged in what appears to be deliberate orbital order. Sitchin claimed this was a depiction of our solar system, the Sun in the center, 11 planets around it, including Nibiru. He argued that this 4,500-year-old seal proved the Sumerians knew the exact number of bodies in our solar system millennia before modern astronomy could confirm them. He even pointed out that the relative sizes of the spheres roughly match the relative sizes of the actual planets, with the larger ones in positions that correspond to Jupiter and Saturn. Critics push back hard. They argue the central symbol on VA 243 is not the sun, but a star symbol used to represent a deity. They point out that cylinder seals were religious and administrative objects, not scientific diagrams. The spheres around the star, they say, are likely decorative or symbolic references to gods, not planets. Dr. Michael Heiser, a scholar of ancient Semitic languages, examined VA 243 and concluded there is no credible astronomical interpretation of the seal. But the pattern keeps repeating. Every time ancient people depict something that looks suspiciously like advanced knowledge, mainstream scholars default to mythology and symbolism. A diagram of circles around a central star becomes religious decoration. A tablet showing planetary order becomes a constellation chart. A cylinder seal that lays out the solar system in its correct configuration becomes a stylized depiction of a god. The refusal to even consider the possibility that ancient people might have known more than we give them credit for borders on intellectual gatekeeping. It is not a scientific position. It is a posture. And the posture has hardened over the last 50 years, even as the evidence has multiplied. The Planet of the Crossing. Sitchin's most controversial translation work centered on a single Sumerian word, Nibiru. In his interpretation, the term meant the planet of the crossing. a world that crossed the paths of other planets during its long elliptical orbit through the solar system. In Sumerian and Babylonian cosmology, Nibiru was associated with Marduk, the king of the gods. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, describes Marduk as a celestial body that swept through the heavens, defeated a primordial chaos dragon called Tiamat, and split her body in half. According to Sitchin, this was not mythology. It was a coded description of an astronomical event. He proposed that Nibiru collided with a primordial planet called Tiamat that once orbited between Mars and Jupiter. The collision split Tiamat in half. One half became Earth. The other half became the asteroid belt, which Sitchin called the hammered bracelet, a term he claimed appeared in the original text. Mainstream scholars dismiss this entirely. They argue the Enuma Elish is a mythological poem, not a historical record. They point out that Sumerian texts never describe space travel, planetary collisions, or anything resembling a scientific account of the solar system. Heiser and other linguists have argued that the term Nibiru in cuneiform texts most likely refers to Jupiter, not a hidden 10th planet. But the dismissals start to feel thin. The Sumerians appeared in Mesopotamia around 4,500 BCE with no clear predecessor civilization. They had advanced writing, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and legal systems that emerged almost fully formed. The Sumerian king list, an ancient text cataloging the rulers of Sumer, claims that kingship was lowered from heaven, and that the earliest kings ruled for tens of thousands of years. The list describes 8 kings who reigned before a great flood, with individual reigns lasting 28,800 years, or 43,200 years. After the flood, the reigns suddenly become shorter, eventually matching normal human lifespans. Mainstream historians call this mythology. The longer you look at the Sumerian record as a whole, the harder it becomes to draw a clean line between what is symbolic and what was simply being described in the only vocabulary the Sumerians had available to them: the flood that everyone remembers. The Epic of Gilgamesh, a Sumerian story later adapted by the Babylonians, describes a great deluge sent by the gods to wipe out humanity. A man named Utnapishtim is warned by the god Ea to build a massive boat and save his family and the seeds of every living creature. The parallels to the biblical story of Noah are undeniable, because the Noah story was almost certainly adapted from this older Sumerian account. Geologists have found evidence of catastrophic flooding in Mesopotamia around 2900 BCE. But the scale described in the myth suggests something far more massive, possibly a global event. Sitchin argued that the Anunnaki, the beings the Sumerians described as gods, triggered the flood by allowing the Antarctic ice shelf to collapse during one of Nibiru's periodic passes through the inner solar system. He claimed the gravitational pull of Nibiru destabilized Earth's crust, causing tectonic shifts and melting ice caps that led to worldwide flooding. Mainstream geologists reject this entirely, pointing out that there is no evidence of a single global flood in the geological record. But the question remains: why do flood myths appear in nearly every ancient culture on Earth? The Sumerians had their deluge, the Hebrews had Noah, the Greeks had Deucalion, the Hindus had Manu. Native American tribes describe great floods. Australian Aboriginal stories speak of rising waters. Chinese mythology includes the story of Gunyu and the Great Flood. These myths span continents and cultures that had no contact with each other. Either humanity collectively invented the same story independently, or something catastrophic happened that was remembered across the world. And the Sumerians, who claimed the flood was triggered by a passing celestial body, were the oldest civilization to write it down. The beings who came with the knowledge. Sitchin did not just say the Sumerians knew about Nibiru, he said they knew about it because the Anunnaki, the gods described in Sumerian mythology, came from Nibiru. According to his interpretation, advanced beings from this hidden planet arrived on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago. They came for resources, particularly gold, which they needed for reasons the texts describe in mythological language, but which Sitchin interpreted as atmospheric repair on their home world. They genetically engineered early humans to serve as workers in their mining operations. The Atrahasis, another Sumerian text, describes the lesser gods complaining about the hard labor of digging canals and mining. The god Enki proposes creating a primitive worker to take over the labor. The goddess Ninhursag with Enki's help, mixes the clay of the earth with the blood of a slain god and creates the first humans. This story is traditionally read as a creation myth. Replace gods with advanced beings and clay with genetic material, and it starts to read like a description of genetic engineering written by people who did not have the vocabulary to describe what they were witnessing. Researcher Michael Tellinger has spent decades studying ancient Sumerian texts and the ruins scattered across southern Africa. He points to the thousands of ancient gold mines in that region, some dating back 100,000 years or more, as evidence of large-scale mining operations that predate known human civilization. He asks how Stone Age humans, supposedly living in small hunter-gatherer groups, managed to excavate millions of tons of rock to extract gold. The precision of certain ancient stonework keeps raising the same question. The massive megaliths of Baalbek in Lebanon, with stone blocks weighing more than 800 tons. The perfectly fitted polygonal walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where stones cut to fit each other so tightly a knife blade cannot pass between them. The granite vaults of Egypt, hollowed out of solid rock, with a precision modern engineers struggle to replicate even with diamond tools. Either ancient humans had construction techniques we have completely lost, or someone with advanced knowledge was guiding them. The DNA that no one can account for. The idea that humans were created or modified by an external intelligence is not unique to Sitchin. Researchers like Lloyd Pye argued for years that the sudden appearance of Homo sapiens, with our oversized brains and lack of clear evolutionary intermediates, suggests intervention. He pointed to the missing link problem, the fact that we have no clear fossil record showing the gradual transition from Homo erectus to fully modern Homo sapiens. DNA research has added another layer to the debate. Modern humans share DNA with Neanderthals and Denisovans. But there are also stretches of human DNA that have no clearly identified evolutionary source. The non-coding sequences that make up over 90% of the human genome continue to puzzle geneticists. And the sheer complexity and apparent redundancy of the human genome remains one of biology's open questions. Whether that complexity points to engineering or simply to processes we do not yet understand, the answer has not been settled. Why NASA stays silent? Despite the 1983 IRAS discovery, despite the 2016 Planet 9 hypothesis, NASA has never launched a dedicated mission to search for a massive outer planet. The agency has stated multiple times that there is no evidence of Nibiru and that claims of a hidden planet threatening Earth are internet hoaxes. The framing matters. Every NASA statement about Nibiru pivots on the word threatening. It denies the doomsday scenario. It does not deny the planet. In 2012, as Mayan calendar doomsday theory spread online, NASA released an official statement debunking Planet X. The agency said that if a planet as large as Nibiru were approaching Earth on a collision course, it would already be visible to the naked eye and would have caused measurable gravitational disturbances throughout the solar system. That 2012 statement is technically accurate, but only for the very specific scenario of an imminent collision. It says nothing about whether a massive planet exists in a far outer orbit, periodically passing through the inner system. It says nothing about whether such a planet's next pass might be centuries or millennia away. It is a denial designed to address a doomsday rumor, not a denial of the underlying astronomical possibility. The distinction is subtle, and the public has never been told to look for it. Every official statement NASA has issued on this subject addresses only the doomsday version, the collision scenario, the internet hoax. None of them address the underlying possibility that something massive is out there and that ancient people somehow knew about it. The silence from NASA on this question is not the silence of an agency that has nothing to say. It is the silence of an agency that has decided the question itself is too radioactive to engage with. That gap, the space between what NASA denies and what NASA refuses to discuss, is where the real mystery lives. The artifact that will not go away. The tablet is still there. It is still in the British Museum. It is still catalogued under K8538, a number that means nothing to anyone who walks past it. It sits on a shelf in a basement room that is not open to the public in a building that receives millions of visitors a year, none of whom know it exists. The official description still calls it an astronomical reference text, showing constellations and stars. There is no mention of a solar system map. There is no acknowledgement of Sitchin's interpretation. There is no footnote about the 1983 IRAS discovery. There is no link to Planet 9. The catalog entry has not been updated in decades. The tablet has outlived every scholar who dismissed it, and it will outlive the next generation that ignores it. And somewhere in the outer solar system, something massive is pulling at distant objects in ways that mainstream science cannot fully explain. The Sumerians called it the Planet of the Crossing. Modern astronomers call it Planet 9. NASA calls it nothing at all. The tablet waits. K8538. A catalog number on a shelf nobody visits. Pressed into clay 5,000 years ago by a civilization that appeared out of nowhere with mathematics and astronomy already finished. It is still there, still unread by anyone willing to say what it actually shows. Waiting in the dark of a museum basement in a city that has long since stopped wondering what the Sumerians knew, for the right person to walk into that room and finally read it correctly. If you made it to the end, hit subscribe. New investigations into forbidden history drop every week, the kind mainstream academia refuses to touch. The next one looks at the Baghdad battery and the evidence that ancient Mesopotamians had access to electricity thousands of years before it was supposedly invented. Click it now. The artifacts only get harder to explain away.